I had always known my father as a strict man, someone who demanded perfection and obedience, and my mother as the quiet backbone of our home. But when I turned 18, everything changed in a single, cruel instant. I found out I was pregnant. I was scared, vulnerable, and looking for support. Instead, my father looked at me with disgust and anger, as if the very idea of my existence was a betrayal of his principles. This is your mistake. You're paying for the errors of the past, he said coldly, and before I could even plead, he opened the door and shoved me out. I was 18, alone, and carrying a life that wasn't yet born, a life that I had to protect at all costs. I stood outside in the stormy evening, the rain soaking through my thin jacket, and my thoughts spun wildly. Where would I go? How would I survive? How would I protect the child growing inside me? Fear tried to creep into my heart, but anger and determination replaced it. I promised myself then that I would never allow anyone to decide my worth. I would survive, and I would rise above the people who had cast me aside. I wandered the streets that night, searching for a safe place to stay. Every alley seemed darker than the next, every knock at a door answered with suspicion. Finally, I found a small shelter for young women in crisis. It wasn't much, but it was warm, and it was safe. I sat on the thin cot, my hands on my belly, and I swore that this child would know love, strength, and resilience, values my father had failed to teach me. I wasn't going to let shame define my life. In the following weeks, I took every small job I could find. Babysitting, cleaning, tutoring younger children, I did whatever I could to earn money. There were days I went without food, nights when I cried silently, and moments when despair whispered in my ear that I was nothing. But each time, I silenced it with a thought: I will show them. I will show everyone. They think I'm weak, abandoned, hopeless, but they haven't seen the fire that burns inside me. Slowly, I began to rebuild. I rented a small apartment, bought used furniture, and created a safe space for my unborn child. I spent hours reading, learning, planning for the future. Education became my weapon, and hard work became my shield. I refused help from anyone who might have pity in their eyes. I would earn everything on my own. Every dollar I earned, every lesson I learned, was a step toward freedom and strength. Months passed, and my child was born, a boy, healthy and full of life. I named him Lucas, a name that would remind him that he was loved, that he was the result of courage, not shame. Caring for him was exhausting, terrifying, and exhilarating all at once. I had no family to help me, no one to lean on, but I had purpose, and that purpose made me invincible. I had to be strong, for him and for me. I wanted him to grow up proud, fearless, and independent. As Lucas grew, so did my ambition. I took night classes, learned new skills, and built a career that slowly began to grow. I was no longer the scared 18-year-old girl kicked out into the storm. I was a woman with vision, a mother with unshakable resolve, and a human being who refused to be defined by others. I invested every ounce of energy into creating a life that my father would never have imagined for me. And then, one day, the realization hit me. Those who had rejected me, who had laughed at my mistakes, who had cast me aside, they had no idea what I had become. They assumed I would be broken, that life would crush me, that the world would take its toll. But I had transformed their doubt into my fuel. I was financially independent, emotionally unshakable, and mentally untouchable. The little girl they tried to humiliate had become a woman they would never recognize. I remember the first time they saw me after years. My father's eyes widened, disbelief washing over his face. My mother, who had stayed silent for so long, looked confused, almost ashamed. I didn't need to speak. My presence, my confidence, the way I held Lucas, all spoke louder than any words. The power of my survival, the proof of my resilience, was in plain sight. And it felt incredible. I didn't plot revenge in the traditional sense. I didn't scheme to hurt them. My revenge was more subtle, more devastating. It was my success, my independence, my happiness. Every moment I laughed, every milestone Lucas reached, every opportunity I seized, it was a silent message: I didn't need them. They tried to break me, but I became stronger because of it. They had underestimated me, and that was their greatest mistake. Life wasn't easy, of course. There were nights when I cried, when exhaustion overtook me, when fear whispered again. But those moments were fleeting, because I had something they could never take: my self-respect, my vision, my determination. I had created a life that no storm, no betrayal, could dismantle. And that realization gave me more power than any anger or vengeance could. Now, as I sit and look at Lucas playing, I smile. I am free. I am unstoppable. And they will never forget the day they made the biggest mistake of their lives. After months of surviving on my own, every day became a lesson in resilience. Lucas had grown a little, and with him, my determination expanded. I realized that my revenge wasn't about confrontation, it was about transformation. I would show my father and everyone who had doubted me that strength, intelligence, and self-respect could never be taken away. I started looking for better jobs, anything that would allow me to learn and grow. I worked in small offices, did freelance work, even took temporary assignments that no one else wanted. Every task, no matter how small, I completed with precision and excellence. I had no time for pity or despair. I was building a life that no one could imagine, a life that would leave my detractors stunned. The hardest part was balancing my work and motherhood. Lucas often stayed up late, cried at night, and sometimes I questioned my ability to manage it all. But those were the moments when I reminded myself that I was not powerless. I had endured worse, and I was still standing. Every sleepless night, every obstacle became a brick in the foundation of my future. I began taking online courses to expand my skills. Business, finance, and even marketing, I devoured everything. Every certificate I earned, every project I completed, added to my growing confidence. Slowly, I began to understand that the power to rise above humiliation lay in knowledge and competence. Money alone wasn't my goal, it was independence, self-sufficiency, and the ability to protect Lucas at all costs. One evening, while Lucas slept, I looked at myself in the mirror. The girl I had once been, scared, vulnerable, and alone, was gone. In her place was a woman whose eyes burned with quiet fire, whose hands had created something from nothing, whose mind had turned adversity into opportunity. I smiled because I realized that my revenge was already in motion. I didn't need to yell or confront anyone, my life would speak for itself. Then came the first opportunity that truly tested me. A friend from my past, someone who knew both my father and the family, invited me to a social event. The twist: my father and step-family would also be there. My heart raced at the thought, but I knew that this was the moment where my transformation would reveal itself. I couldn't go in seeking confrontation. I had to go in as proof of my success, proof of my survival, proof of my strength. The day arrived. I, dressed elegantly but with understated confidence. Lucas was in a cute outfit, holding my hand. I entered the room with steady steps, scanning the crowd. And then I saw them, my father, standing arrogantly as if nothing had changed, expecting the scared girl he had kicked out. My stepmother glanced briefly at me, and then shock registered. My father's jaw dropped slightly, his eyes wide. I didn't smile yet. I let the moment simmer. Let them feel the weight of their underestimation. I walked past the crowd, Lucas in tow, and people turned to look. Whispers ran through the room. Is that her? That's impossible. She's thriving. My presence alone created tension, curiosity, and astonishment. My father, who had thrown me out and mocked my vulnerability, was forced to confront reality. I had not only survived, but I had thrived. Every hardship had been a step toward this moment, and it was exhilarating. After a brief pause, I greeted a few mutual acquaintances politely, never letting my eyes leave my father. The silent message was clear: the girl you thought was broken is now untouchable. Lucas tugged at my hand, and I smiled down at him. He was my proof, my companion, my living reminder that love and resilience could overcome cruelty. Later, during dinner, my father tried to speak to me. His words faltered. I answered politely but with measured calm, letting him feel the difference between the past and the present. I didn't need to lecture him. My confidence, my posture, and my demeanor conveyed everything. That evening, I realized that my revenge wasn't in words, it was in life itself. Over the following months, I began receiving subtle acknowledgments from those who had ignored me before. Old acquaintances were amazed at my accomplishments, the respect I commanded, and the way I carried myself. Invitations arrived for events, collaborations, and networking opportunities. People who had mocked or dismissed me earlier now looked at me as an example of perseverance and intelligence. But my father, he still struggled. Each time our paths crossed, there was awkward silence, lingering glances, and unspoken questions. He didn't know how to address my independence, my strength, or the fact that his decisions had propelled me to heights he never imagined. That realization alone was satisfaction. I didn't need him to apologize or recognize me fully, his discomfort was enough to prove my point. Through all of this, I never lost focus on Lucas. He grew up in a loving environment, surrounded by books, creativity, and endless support. I made sure he understood the value of self-respect, the power of education, and the strength of perseverance. I wanted him to inherit not just my genes, but my mindset, a weapon no one could ever take from him. And as my life progressed, the ultimate realization came: revenge is sweetest when it's invisible. The people who tried to diminish you never see the battles you've fought, the sacrifices you've made, or the victories you've won. They only witness the end result, and that is far more powerful than any confrontation. My father's mistakes had forged my resilience, and my success became the undeniable proof. Looking back, I understand now that being kicked out at 18, while devastating at the time, was the catalyst I needed. It forced me to grow, to adapt, to become a force beyond anyone's control. Every late night, every struggle, every challenge was a brushstroke in the masterpiece of my revenge, a life lived fully, proudly, and independently. By the end of that year, I had secured a stable career, a home for Lucas and me, and a network of support built entirely on my own merit. The girl who had been abandoned, mocked, and underestimated had become someone who commanded respect without demanding it. The lessons of survival, resilience, and self-worth had transformed me into a woman who no one could diminish. By the time I reached my mid-20s, I had completely transformed my life. Lucas was thriving, curious, and full of energy, and my career had taken off in ways I never thought possible. I had built a life of stability, respect, and independence, exactly what I had promised myself all those stormy nights when I was 18 and homeless. But the story wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about triumph. And it was about showing the world, and those who had doubted me, that I had emerged stronger, smarter, and unstoppable. The turning point came when a mutual acquaintance invited me to a charity gala, a high-profile event that my father and step-family were known to attend. I knew this was my moment. I didn't want to confront them with anger or bitterness, my revenge was more subtle and far more powerful. I wanted them to see the woman I had become, the life I had built from nothing. I wanted them to feel the weight of underestimating me, the consequences of cruelty, without me having to utter a single word. On the night of the gala, I dressed elegantly, understated yet commanding attention. Lucas wore a tiny suit, looking adorable yet confident, as if he knew this night was special. We arrived just as the room was filling with high-profile guests, the chandeliers casting a warm glow over polished floors and sparkling tables. Every eye in the room subtly turned toward us, but the look on my father's face was something I would never forget. Disbelief, shock, and a twinge of shame flickered across his expression. He had expected me to be broken, dependent, or timid, but here I was, radiant, confident, and commanding presence without arrogance. I moved through the crowd with calm grace, greeting old acquaintances and friends who had once doubted me. Lucas clung gently to my hand, and I caught the glances of those who remembered my past. Whispers began to circulate. Is that her? She's done all this. Every step I took amplified the contrast between the helpless girl I had once been and the woman standing before them. My father's rigid posture stiffened as I passed, each smile, each nod I gave to someone else a silent message that I had no need of his approval. During dinner, our tables were side by side. I could hear him struggling to find words. Every attempt to speak to me faltered into awkwardness. I responded with politeness and calm composure, allowing my presence, my demeanor, and the life I had built to speak for me. He wanted confrontation, and I offered something far more devastating, proof that he had failed to break me. That evening, I realized that revenge isn't about rage, it's about success, presence, and the quiet satisfaction of proving someone wrong without lowering yourself to their level. The following months became a game of silent triumph. Invitations for speaking engagements, networking events, and collaborations began arriving. People who had once laughed at me now sought my advice. I became a symbol of resilience and self-made success, a person who had taken a crushing blow and turned it into power. Every milestone Lucas reached, every achievement I earned, was a living testament to what could be accomplished when determination, intelligence, and resilience collide. I even noticed subtle shifts in my father's behavior. He would attend events I was at, hoping perhaps to gauge me, to measure what he had missed. Every time, I remained composed. I smiled politely, but the glint in my eyes carried years of endurance, struggle, and unyielding determination. The silent message was simple yet crushing: I had survived because of myself, not because of him. He had provided me with no support, and yet I had flourished. One evening, as I sat with Lucas reading stories before bed, I reflected on how far we had come. I thought about those nights of fear, the cold streets, the endless obstacles that had seemed insurmountable. Every struggle had shaped me, every tear had fueled me, every lonely moment had strengthened my resolve. And the most beautiful part, those who had tried to hurt me were now powerless to affect my life. My father's harsh words, my stepmother's scorn, they had only prepared me for a victory that was entirely mine. Then came the day my father finally approached me with a small, awkward apology. I listened silently, my expression calm, almost neutral. I didn't feel the need to forgive him immediately, not because I harbored bitterness, but because the moment had already passed. My life was mine, my son's future was secure, and the proof of my resilience had been displayed countless times without me ever seeking it. That day, I understood the ultimate truth. Real revenge is not in confrontation, but in flourishing, in becoming unstoppable, in living a life so full and empowered that those who tried to diminish you can do nothing but watch. Over time, I expanded my career, mentoring young women in similar situations, helping them see that survival is just the beginning and triumph is possible. Lucas grew up witnessing his mother's strength firsthand, learning lessons that no school could teach: courage, independence, and the beauty of rising above cruelty. My story became more than my revenge, it became a testament, a guide, and a beacon of hope for others facing abandonment, rejection, or betrayal. I occasionally think back to that stormy night when I was kicked out at 18. I remember the fear, the hopelessness, the cold that seemed to seep into my bones. But I also remember the fire it sparked within me, the determination to survive, the vow to protect my child, the relentless drive to become someone they could never ignore. That night, which had once seemed like the end, became the catalyst for a life I had imagined only in dreams. In the end, my revenge was not a confrontation, not a harsh word, and not even a demonstration of superiority. My revenge was my life. Lucas playing in our home, my career flourishing, my independence absolute, and the quiet knowledge that I had turned betrayal into triumph. My father and step family could see it all, but there was nothing they could do to reverse it. They had underestimated me, discarded me, and in doing so, had forged the strongest version of myself. As I watched Lucas laugh that evening, I realized that I had achieved more than revenge, I had achieved freedom. The freedom to live, to love, to prosper, and to never depend on those who once abandoned me. And in that freedom, I found the ultimate victory, a life lived fully, proudly, and beyond anyone's control.